discover which is your dominant eye, or indeed whether or not you've got central vision. My best advice is seek out a qualified coach and he'll tell you.
Slightly outside of it. You can't come on it blind because you're not starting dead with it. By letting it go, you're coming in, and then you're just coming. Oh! Whoa! All right. Start again.
And I've put in the second cartridge.
Okay, ready?
Oh!
Better.
Hello, I'm Michael Yardley and welcome to the Start Shooting video. You'll find all the information you need in this program to get you started in the exciting sport of shotgun shooting. Whether your interest is in live quarry or clay target shooting, or indeed both, you'll find information in this video which will be extremely useful. We'll consider the wide variety of shooting sports shortly. First though, let's start right at the beginning and look at the shotgun itself. A shotgun is a smoothbore weapon which fires a cartridge containing spherical pellets. It's to be distinguished from a rifle, which has spiral grooves in the barrel to impart spin to a single bullet. Here's a rifle bullet, and by way of comparison, here's a shotgun cartridge. I've cut the top off this one to show you the pellets. They're about 300. These pellets leave the barrel of the shotgun in an elongated swarm. There's also some spread of shot. This may be controlled by what we call the choke of the gun. Choke is a slight constriction at the muzzles, the end of the barrels. Within reasonable limits, this constriction can improve the shooting qualities of a smoothbore gun firing shot. Different degrees of constriction, and we're only talking about a few thousandths of an inch, suit different applications. A gun for use at long range, which in shotgun terms is 35 yards or more, will want more choke than a gun designed to be used at shorter ranges. Designated choke constrictions start with true cylinder, which is no choke, and move up in the order improved cylinder, quarter choke, half choke, 3/4, and full. Full choke is usually a constriction relative to the bore size of about 40 thou. Most shotguns do have some choke. In case you're still not clear about choke though, think of the nozzle of a garden hose. Open chokes lead to a wide pattern. Tight chokes, the ones which are most effective at range, lead to a much narrower pattern. To qualify legally as a conventional shotgun in the UK, a gun must have a barrel more than 24 inches long, and the overall length must be no less than 40 inches. Nearly all sporting shotguns fall within these parameters. It's rare today to see a sporting shotgun with the barrels less than 25 inches, and the most common lengths are 28 and 30. The most popular shotgun is the 12-bore. A 12-bore is called a 12 because of an old system of measuring the bore size of cannons. A 25-pounder takes a ball weighing 25 pounds, a 10-pounder one weighing 10 pounds. The same system was applied to muskets and is still used today for shotguns. Thus a 12-bore gun is one in which 12 lead balls of the same diameter as the bore would weigh a pound. In a 20 bore, another common bore size, 20 balls the size of the bore would weigh a pound. A shotgun, like a rifle, is a long arm. That is a weapon designed to be held with both hands and fired with support from the shoulder. It has a stock, generally made of wood, and the thick end of the stock is called the butt. Remember that old phrase, lock, stock and barrel? It refers to the lock, stock and barrel of a rifle or shotgun. Although both rifles and shotguns are fired from the shoulder, it's important to understand that each is used in a very different manner. Rifles have sights and are aimed. Shotguns are pointed at moving targets. There's not usually time for precise aiming with the shotgun. Indeed, precise aiming with a shotgun is likely to lead to poor shooting. We mentioned earlier the differences between rifle bullets and shotgun pellets. I might also mention here that the range of shotguns and rifles are very different. A 4-bore rifle can be lethal at a mile or more. A shotgun firing conventional cartridges is dangerous out to about 300 yards, but only effective to about 60. Most shotgun shooting is done well under 40 yards. Shotguns have a simple front sight called a bead. When you fire a shotgun, you don't focus on this as you would in rifle shooting. You must focus sharply on the target. The bead is seen, but only in one's peripheral vision. Those who've shot rifles in the past often make the mistake of trying to aim a shotgun precisely like a rifle, lining up the bead with the moving target. It doesn't work. Invariably, they end up shooting behind the target. When shooting, one must engineer a situation so that the pellets arrive at where the target is going, rather than where the target is when one pulls the trigger. In the case of a crossing target, one must shoot in front of it. In the case of a rising target, above. Making an allowance for the movement of the target is called applying forward allowance or lead. It's one of the great skills of shotgunning. We'll discuss how to do it later. I might note at this point that it's a common misunderstanding that shotguns are easy weapons to use because they fire a mass of pellets rather than a single bullet. Not true. The art of shotgun shooting, shooting at fast-moving airborne targets, takes a lot of hard work to master. Easy it isn't, enthralling and addictive it certainly is. Let's consider some of the important parts of a shotgun now. We've already considered the butt, the barrels and the bead. This is called the rib. This is the fore end. This, of course, is the trigger. This is the trigger guard. And this is the action. This is called the safety catch. Now, I want to discuss safety in more detail later, but I will note now that you shouldn't rely on safety catches too much. Frequently, a safety catch is no more than a trigger block. A gun can go off, for example, when it's dropped, even with the safety catch applied. The golden rule of gun safety is never point a gun at something you're not willing to kill. Another vitally important point is that you should always make sure that a gun is unloaded and unobstructed when you pick it up, when it's passed to you, or when you pass it to someone else. Remember, every gun is potentially lethal. Treat guns with respect and always treat a gun as if it was loaded. This gun has two barrels, one beside the other. It's called a side-by-side. A side-by-side is a break-action gun. By pushing this lever to one side, I may open or break the gun. Break-action guns, the most common type of shotgun in the UK, may be made with single barrels, with one barrel on top of the other, or with barrels side by side. Single-barreled guns are very limited in their use. Most sporting applications require some sort of double-barreled gun. This gun is an over and under. It's a very popular gun today. This one, like most over and unders, has a single trigger. It's a convenience to have a single trigger when shooting at two targets which are in the air at the same time. One doesn't need to move the hand for the second shot, as one must with a double-triggered gun. The trigger mechanism on this gun, like that on most modern over and unders, may be selected to fire either the top or bottom barrel first. It's called a selective trigger mechanism. Usually one fires the bottom barrel first. Most side-by-sides have double triggers. In their case, the front fires the right barrel and the rear trigger the left. Over the years, there's been quite a lot of debate on the relative merits of over and under and side-by-side shotguns. These days, one sees more over and unders than anything else, and in competition, over and unders reign supreme. But there are still people who prefer the side-by-side, especially for game shooting. It tends to be made lighter than the over and under, and it's marginally quicker to reload. The problem with repeaters is that one can't see immediately that they're unloaded, as one can with a break-action gun when it's open. It has to be said, though, that there's something of a prejudice against repeaters in this country. They do, however, have their uses. For example, a gas-operated semi-automatic is a great gun to teach kids with because of its low recoil characteristic. Now, we'll discuss what sort of gun is suited to what sort of shooting in more detail later. Now, though, let's look at some of the different shooting sports. Some people like to think of shotgun shooting as if it fell neatly into two categories: game shooting and clay shooting. Not me. I'm an enthusiastic game and clay shot, and I've been shooting for nearly 30 years. The basic skills of shotgun shooting are the same for clay and game shooting. However, it's universally accepted today that whether one's primary interest is in clay shooting, it's on a clay shooting field that one should learn the basics of how to shoot. So I shall talk about clay shooting first. The first clay target was shot in the UK just over 100 years ago. There was one other significant type of inanimate shotgun target before the advent of the clay pigeon, the glass ball. But glass targets weren't very practical, and they were quickly ousted by clays. As well as tracing its ancestry via glass ball shooting, clay shooting developed from and shares some common terminology with the old and rather cruel sport of live pigeon shooting. That is, shooting at pigeons released from a box trap to the front of the shooter. The word trap is still used to describe the device which throws clay pigeons in all the different types of clay shooting. And it's also the name of a specific type of clay shooting, trap shooting, which is set up to this day much like the old live pigeon shoots. In the most common form of trap shooting in the UK, down the line, there are 5 stands for shooters, each positioned 16 yards from a trap to their front. All the targets in trap shooting are moving away from the shooter, sometimes straight away, but more often on a quartering angle. Trap shooters generally shoot gun up, that is, with the gun pre-mounted in the shoulder. Great fun in its own right, and indeed an Olympic sport in one of its forms, trap shooting is a fairly specialist business, and it requires specialist equipment to shoot well. Another popular form of clay shooting is called skeet. It was devised around 1910 by 3 enthusiastic American bird hunters, C.E. Davis, Henry Davis, and William Foster. They wanted a means to practice their shooting off-season, and they came up with the idea of shooting round the clock. The original version of the game had a clay trap positioned on the edge of a 25-yard radius circle. Shooting points were positioned around the circle like the numbers on a clock face. The trap itself was positioned at 12 and threw the clay towards 6 o'clock. The game was to move positions and thus shoot around the clock. As legend has it, the neighbours complained of shot falling on their land, so the boys in Massachusetts cut the circle in half and added an extra trap. Skeet, as we know it today, was born, but it took a Mrs. Gertrude Hulbert of Montana to name the new game. She won a competition in an American shooting magazine for a snappier name than shooting round the clock. Skeet, or skitter, a Scandinavian word for shooting, was the best of 10,000 entries and earned Mrs. Hulbert $100, a tidy sum in 1926. To this day, skeet, which is shot to English, American and Olympic rules, remains excellent practice for game shooting. I'm an enthusiastic skeet shot, but the most popular form of clay shooting in Britain, and my own favourite clay sport, is sporting clays. This sport, now spreading all over the world, developed from the type of shooting that was offered at the great English shooting schools as a means of practising game shooting. At first it was seen just as a way of practising, but fairly quickly it became a sport in its own right. In sporting shooting, a very wide variety of targets are presented to the shooter. The basic idea, though it's not always adhered to, is that the targets should emulate the flight of live quarry species. Thus, on a typical sporting layout, one might be confronted by crossing pigeon, springing teal, grouse, high pheasant, and the bête noire of many a sporting shot, bolting rabbits. The fun of sporting is that the targets are so variable. Like skeet, it's superb practice for game shooting, especially when it's shot from a gun down position, that is, with the gun starting out of the shoulder. Sporting shooting is also one of the most demanding clay disciplines. Runs of 100 straight, 100 breaks without a miss, are fairly common at trap and skeet, but very, very rare at sporting. Sporting's not an Olympic discipline yet, as skeet and trap are, but it's quite likely that it will become an Olympic discipline soon. I've already noted that I believe that everyone who shoots game should start with clays. When we shoot at live quarry, it's the harvest of a wonderful natural resource. Everyone who shoots is honour bound to make sure that their part in that harvest is as efficient and humane as possible. And it's worth making another point before considering the various live quarry sports. The act of shooting is only a small part of live quarry shooting. Learning to shoot live quarry is also about learning to know the countryside and the wildlife that it supports. It's about putting back as much or more into the countryside as one takes out. We have a wonderful tradition of responsible game shooting in Britain and of wise management of game birds. Because of it, we're privileged to enjoy some of the best shooting in the world. Shooting and the management of game are all part of the conservation process. To use the vernacular, shooting's green. So, if you want to shoot game, you must get to know and love the countryside. If you live in town and have little experience of the country, my best advice is to find someone who's knowledgeable to help you. Failing that, educate yourself, so that at the least you can recognise birds, plants, crops and trees. This is a major but thoroughly enjoyable undertaking. The more you learn about the countryside, the more enjoyment you'll get from it. Shotguns have been around for about 500 years, but wing shooting with sporting shotguns, rather than hunting for the pot with primitive smoothbores, is a more modern phenomenon. It was first popularised in England by the courtiers of Charles II, who brought the sport and the necessary equipment with them from France. By the 18th century, it had become fashionable, but it was not really until the 19th century, when sporting guns had been perfected, that the art of shooting flying really came into its own. Principally, there are 4 types of bird shooting in the UK, although each may be subdivided. First, we have driven shooting, the most formal type of bird shooting, although interestingly, the most recently developed. Driven shooting was popularised in the second half of the last century and was made practical both by the improvements in firearms already mentioned and by the advent of sophisticated techniques for rearing game birds. The most popular forms of driven shooting involve pheasant, partridge and grouse. The high pheasant of the West Country and Hampshire are famous, as are the partridges of East Anglia, but in the public imagination and in the minds of many sportsmen, the grouse of Scotland are probably preeminent. In driven shooting, whatever the specific quarry, a line of beaters, men who literally beat the ground before them with sticks, walk towards a line of guns, typically 8 or 10, each spaced about 40 yards apart. During their march forward, the beaters encourage the birds out of cover and into flight. When all things are going well, they fly towards the guns. Presenting driven birds has developed into an art. It's both sport and a form of farming. Those who undertake driven shooting are expected to adhere to a rigid and quite complex code of conduct. There are codes of dress and etiquette and rigid safety standards. Driven shooting may be bought by the day, or one may buy a share in a syndicate. That is a group of guns who pool financial resources to maintain a shoot. If you want to shoot driven game, the place to start, long before you consider buying any shooting, is at a shooting school which specialises in the education of game shots. The younger you start, the better. Next, we might consider rough shooting. In rough shooting, a gun or guns, we always call the person shooting a gun, walks up quarry in a field or wood. In many ways, what we call rough shooting today is the original form of shotgun hunting. Quarry, when rough shooting, might include game birds when they're in season, rabbits, and pigeon. It might also include vermin, squirrels, jays, magpies, crows, and rats. Shooting unprotected predator and vermin species is a great help to gamekeepers and farmers. Rough shooting is a good school for formal driven shooting, an ideal halfway house between the shooting school and the formal driven day. There are many guns who actually prefer rough shooting. It involves more walking, it's less formal, and what one takes home at the end of the day is unpredictable. As well as rough shooting, we might also identify pigeon shooting as a distinct pursuit. Not pigeon shooting from traps, or the sort of walked-up shooting that one might do when one's rough shooting, but shooting at wild pigeons from a hide. Pigeon shooting involves specialist, but relatively inexpensive equipment, decoys for example. It's a great and underrated sport, much cheaper than driven shooting, but every bit as challenging. It's also a valuable service to farmers. Pigeons are great crop destroyers. Finally, there's the great sport of wildfowling. Here the quarry might be duck or geese. The skills involved in wildfowling are very great. One must learn to shoot, one must learn to identify quarry and protected species, no mean feat, and one must learn the marsh and to read the tides and weather if one's to survive on the foreshore. Wildfowling is the most physically demanding of shooting sports. If you're interested, the place to start is at your nearest wildfowling club. Incidentally, many of our marshes are wardened by wildfowlers who manage and conserve the habitat. We've already noted a couple of basic but vitally important points of safety. Never point a gun at something you're not willing to kill, and always make sure that a gun is unloaded and unobstructed when you pick it up, when it's passed to you, or when you pass it to someone else. Now I want to look at a few more points of safety in a little bit more detail. First, let's consider taking a gun out of a slip. Now, the golden rule of shooting, as I've already noted, is never point a gun at something you're not willing to kill. But it's amazing how many people actually do end up pointing the gun at someone else, particularly other people's feet or at their legs, when they take the guns from slips. So the rule here is to break the gun before it comes out of the slip and to make sure that your finger is on the trigger guard and not on the trigger when you do that. Always, when I pick up a gun, I always check that it's unloaded and that there are no obstructions in the barrels. This is the result of not doing that. And it comes from one of the classic shooting accidents, confusing 20-bore and 12-bore cartridges. What happens is that somebody inadvertently loads a 20-bore cartridge into a 12-bore chamber and then overloads a 12-bore cartridge on top of it. You end up with a hand grenade next to your face. There are two safe ways to carry a gun. One is on your forearm, like this. Note that the gun is open, of course, and that the trigger guard is behind the arm, not in front of it, like that. And the other good way to carry a gun is actually in a slip. When we carry a gun in a gun slip, always do so with the muzzles pointing down. That way, if you've forgotten to fasten the slip, the gun won't fall into the mud. Whenever possible, a gun should be broken and unloaded. When we're clay shooting, the only time it's permissible to have a closed and loaded gun is when you're actually on the firing point with the muzzles of the gun pointing downrange. When you walk onto the firing point, the gun should of course be open and unloaded, and at all times on the clay shooting field. When you've finished shooting, before you turn around to leave the cage, you check to make sure that the gun is unloaded and unobstructed before you turn to leave. The full procedure for safety when we're game shooting falls beyond the scope of this introductory programme. But there are some points that I'd like to note. The first is that whenever possible when you're game shooting, don't have the gun closed and loaded. Unless you're actually just about to shoot, the gun should be broken and unloaded. Be very careful where you point the gun. Remember the golden rule. Be careful particularly when you're shooting with companions. Never allow a closed gun to sweep towards your companions on either side. And when you're actually waiting for a shot, be careful about where those muzzles are directed, either at the ground or up in the sky. The use of the safety catch is another important point. The safety catch should be on at all times when you're game shooting, except when you've identified a target that you're about to shoot. I can see the bird, my gun's coming up to it, the safety catch comes off, and the gun comes to the shoulder. Never stand or walk with a gun when you're game shooting with the safety catch off. Now, another interesting point about the safety catch is that with a game gun, you should have an automatic safety catch. That means that as soon as the gun is opened, the safety catch will come on automatically. Clay guns don't always have that facility. So if you're interested in game shooting, make sure that you buy a gun with an automatic safety catch. When you're out walking with a gun, never cross an obstacle without making sure that the gun is broken and unloaded. If you're with a companion, one person should keep those broken guns on one side of the obstacle, the other person should get over the obstacle, and then the gun should be handed to the person who's crossed the obstacle butt first. You'll have noted then that when I picked the gun up, I broke it with the muzzle still pointing skywards. Now, an interesting area which we haven't covered yet is closing the gun. Some people will tell you that you ought to bring the stock up to the barrels like that. Well, yes, that's an acceptable way of closing a gun. But I sometimes find with beginners that when they try that, the gun actually rotates about the axis of the front hand and ends up pointing at their own feet. So the way I prefer to teach beginners to close a gun is like this. Hold the gun, broken and turned slightly clockwise if you're a right-hander. Bring all your weight onto your front foot, push up with your front hand, your left hand, and push down with the right hand. The gun closes under control, pointing at about 45 degrees into the ground. That way, should the gun go off by accident, and remember, it's surprising how many times unloaded guns do go off, no damage will be done. The gun will go off harmlessly into the ground. We've talked about some of the basics of safety, and essentially it's all common sense. I just want to note now that again it's common sense that your gun should be in sound condition and in proof before you actually shoot it. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail here. Enough to say that if you have any doubts whatsoever about the condition of the gun or whether or not it's in proof, seek out the opinion of a gunsmith or a shooting instructor and ask them. Every gun that is in proper proof will have marks on it which designate the cartridge that's suitable for that gun. Now, this is a 12 bore and it's been proofed for a 2 3/4 inch cartridge. That means that a 2.5 inch cartridge could also be used safely in it. Now, with some old English guns, and I've got a very old gun here, this gun actually has what we call Damascus barrels, which is twist steel barrels. And it's only been proofed for 2.5 inch cartridges. If I used a modern 2 3/4 inch cartridge in this gun, I might well blow it up. So find out what sort of cartridge your gun takes. Now, gun safety isn't only about handling guns sensibly and making sure they're in good shooting condition. It's also about protecting yourself, protecting your hearing, and protecting your eyesight. If you don't wear some sort of hearing protection, I guarantee that you'll go deaf or develop tinnitus. Now, the choice of hearing protection is up to you. You can wear simple earmuffs like these. You can wear the electronic type, which have the advantage that they cut out gun noise, but they amplify normal sounds. Or you can settle for simple little plugs like this, made of a spongy plastic material that you knead into shape and put into your ear canal. You can even go for elaborate plugs like these ones. And these have been custom moulded to fit my ear canals. Frankly though, with all the various products that are available for protecting your hearing, My own favourite are these simple, cheap plugs. Now, on the question of eyesight, everyone who shoots is going to want to have a pair of sunglasses. Very, very useful. But it's up to you whether you decide that it's prudent to wear eye protection of some sort all the time as well. If you do, make sure that the lenses of the glasses that you buy are impact resistant. These are. I want to consider now the sort of gun you might start your shooting career with. Now, this is a box lock, non-ejector, and it's typical of the sort of gun people used to learn to shoot with. It's still an excellent gun, but it has to be said that the gun that's winning the prizes and the gun that more and more people are using both for clay and game shooting is the over and under. I've got one here, it's a Browning 325. And one of the advantages of this gun is that it's equipped with multi-chokes. That is a choke device inside the barrels at the muzzle end that you can remove easily with a special tool. You can then set this gun up so it's suitable for almost any type of shooting. Most over and unders tend to be made a little heavier than the equivalent game gun. My own opinion is that the over and under controls recoil a little bit more effectively than the side-by-side. Before we consider how to shoot, I want to consider eye dominance. It's a much more important subject than you might think. Shotgun shooting's easier and more effective keeping both eyes open, but not everybody can keep both eyes open. It depends on which eye is dominant. I'm a right-handed person and I've got a right master eye. Let me demonstrate that to you. If I bring my thumb up, you'll see that it's in line with my right eye. Had I had a left master eye, it would have looked like that. Some people actually have neither eye dominant. That's so-called central vision. Here's a simple test for you to ascertain whether you're right or left eye dominant. Make a hole with your hands, like that, look at an object on the horizon, bring the hole up into your line of sight, and bring your hands back to your face. Which eye did you come back to? That's probably your dominant eye. Now, I want to show you just why this business of eye dominance is so important. Say, for example, you're a right-hander, but you've got a left master eye, and you don't know about it. I'm going to point this gun into the camera now to show you the effect of that, and I'm going to ask the cameraman to step aside. I'll prove the gun is empty to you. Right. So I'm now a right-hander with a left master eye, and I'm mounting the gun into the camera. I'm pointing directly at the camera lens with the left eye as master. Can you see the problem? The gun's actually pointing well to the side of the camera, and that's at this short range, which is only about 6 or 8 feet. At 25 yards, I've missed the target by a very long way indeed. This is what we want to see. A right-hander with a right master eye, and you'll see that my eye is looking straight along the rib, and that my eye is just above the rib. Notice that I said that the eye was just above the rib. Very important consideration in shotgun shooting is the fit of the gun, particularly what we call the drop of the gun. That is the distance here from an imaginary extension of the rib to the top of the stock, which we call the comb. It's very important that when you buy a gun, or indeed when you're being taught with a borrowed gun, that that gun fits you. The gun must fit you for drop. Here, that is the drop from that imaginary line from the rib to the top of the stock, the comb. The gun must be the right length for you, and the cast of the gun must be right. Now, most gun stocks are cast over to the right slightly for right-handers and to the left slightly for left-handers. That's to allow them, and I'm going to clear that gun to you once more, that's to allow the gun to line up with the eye. If I hadn't got a little bit of right-hand cast on this gun, my eye would come over to the side. So, in conclusion, the gun must fit you, and the only person that's going to be able to tell you that is an expert, so seek one out. It's not the intention of this introductory program to teach you how to shoot. What I can do is give you a few pointers, and let's start with how to hold the gun and how to stand. When you hold the gun, make sure that you've got a good firm grip with the rear hand. The position of the thumb is important. It shouldn't be here on the safety catch, because if you leave it there, there's the danger that the top lever will come back into the tip of your thumb in recoil. No, the thumb should be wrapped around like that. Front hand position is also important. The best place to have your front hand is not back here or too far to the front, but somewhere in the middle of the forend, like that. I also like to point the index finger at the target. Okay, let's now think about how we're going to stand. Imagine we're going to shoot a target at 12 o'clock, and 12 o'clock is in that direction there as I'm orientated. The front foot, which in my case is a right-handed, right master-eyed shot, is the left foot, and that foot is at approximately 1 o'clock to the killing point for the target at 12 o'clock. The rear foot, in my case the right foot, is approximately at 3 o'clock. Notice the gap between the heels, about 6 inches, and all my weight is on the ball of the front foot. The ideal shooting position would have a straight line going through your front shoulder, through your front hip, to the ball of your front foot, like this. Now I want to consider how we mount the gun. That word, by the by, means bringing the gun up to the face and to the shoulder, like this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Now, you'll see a lot of people who've shot game and come onto clays holding their gun in all sorts of funny positions. What counts when we're shooting at clays, and as we've noted, that's the place to learn to shoot whether you want to shoot game or clays, what counts when you shoot clays is to hold the gun in a starting position so that the muzzles of the gun, the tip of the gun, is just under the flight line of the bird. Then, as I mount the gun, I push the gun forward slightly and I bring it up to my cheek. And as I do that, the shoulder comes in behind. 1, 2, 3. It's not just a pivoting motion like that, but it's a pushing motion too. The important point to note there is that the gun comes up to the face first, and then the shoulder pushes in behind, like that. 2 things you shouldn't do, which unfortunately a lot of beginners do, in fact not just beginners. You mustn't mount the gun on your arm like that. The proper position for the gun is in between the shoulder joint and the collarbone, in the so-called shoulder pocket. Now, not everybody will be able to get it exactly into that pocket. Some people do have to come out a little further. But what's definitely wrong is to mount the gun on the arm like that. Another common error with the gun mount is to bring the gun up to the shoulder and then to bring the head down onto the gun like that. What you want to do is to always bring the gun up to the face and then push the shoulder in behind. We've considered the simple gun mount, but in real shooting situations, we're going to have to move the gun horizontally as well. In other words, we're going to have to swing the gun as well. In other words, the mount is going to be smoothly executed with a swing at the same time, like this. 1, 2, 3. Now, the point to note there is that you shouldn't move the gun with your arms. You shouldn't try and do this. What you've got to do is to move the top of your body like a tank turret. You're rotating from the hips. You'll also notice there that when I started, I had the gun out of the shoulder. Now, as far as beginners are concerned, it's likely that you'll take your first few shots with the gun actually pre-mounted in the shoulder. But after you've mastered that, it's very important, particularly if you're going to shoot game, that you learn to mount the gun with the stock out of the shoulder. And the starting position for the stock should be roughly parallel with your forearm. 1, 2, 3. We've considered some of the basics of technique, but now let's consider how to actually shoot a moving target in the air. The first thing we want to do is to have a look at one. Pull! If you can point a finger, you can break a clay. It really is that simple. But remember, you've got to shoot ahead of the target. If you shoot directly at it, you're going to miss behind. Let's try it for real. On go the specs. In goes the hearing protection. And the first thing I do is set my footwork up so I'm facing the area where I want to kill the target. I check that the gun's unobstructed and that it's pointing in a safe direction, and I load it. The gun comes up onto the area where I want to kill the target. I wind back to where I first see the target clearly, and I look at the area where I see the target as a blur or streak. The muzzles of the gun are just under the line of the target. Pull! And one other thing I didn't mention, you must lock your eyes onto the target all the way through the process of shooting. Your fine focus must be on the target all the time. Pull! We spoke earlier about lead. That is the business of shooting in front of a moving target. But what I didn't say was that everybody sees lead differently. Some people will have to see a lot of lead, some people a little. And the only way you'll find out is actually practicing yourself. What we have got, though, are some shots here to show you how lead is actually applied as seen by a camera. On the subject of forward allowance, remember that you've got to move the muzzles to the bird and then you've got to get in front of it. If you're shooting with the gun up, in the shoulder, all you've got to worry about is get those muzzles to the bird, pull ahead of the bird and pull the trigger. If you're shooting from the gun down position, what happens is this. You see the bird, the muzzles go to it with the butt still out of the shoulder, and then as the mount and swing progress, you pull ahead of the bird and pull the trigger. It helps to have a camera to show you what lead looks like, but it's a very hard thing to describe in words. I always say to my students that you've got to feel the lead. You've also got to realise that the shot coming out of the gun isn't coming in a flat wall, but it's going in an elongated column, like a jet of water, towards the target. Pull! The secret to learning how to shoot is to do that 10,000 times.